David.
Crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric.
Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
I 100% believe in my heart and know in my heart he did.
The crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric. That is the official statement from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. It is not commentary. It is not opinion. It is a legal filing, a statement of fact entered into the public record during a 5-day preliminary hearing that has now bound defendant David Anthony Burke over for trial. The evidence presented paints a portrait not just of violence, but of methodical effort to make a human being disappear. And here's the visual that should anchor this entire case in your mind: a Tesla. Not a weapon. Not a back alley. A 21st century electric vehicle packed with sensors and cameras, allegedly used as a containment unit.
David Anthony Burke is known for a song called Romantic Homicide, and only a sick, disturbed mind like David Anthony Burke would think that a homicide is romantic.
A car built on software that tracks everything, allegedly parked and abandoned with the front trunk becoming something it was never engineered to be. A sealed vault of decomposition. That image, advanced technology turned into a concealment device, defines the contradiction at the heart of this prosecution. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Beyond the Gavel file. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. The transcript of the preliminary hearing reveals a narrative built on 4 pillars: documented relationship, financial motive, digital tracking, and post-event conduct. Each pillar stands alone. Combined, they form the architecture of the prosecution's argument. First, the relationship. According to testimony, David and the victim, 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, communicated through Instagram and Discord. The state introduced text messages, photographs, and records of an Uber ride summoned by David to transport Celeste 80 miles from Lake Elsinore to the Hollywood Hills on April 23, 2025.
Let's begin with the basics. This is 21-year-old David Anthony Burke, known professionally as David, D4VD. He rose to fame as a Gen Z singer in 2022 for his hit song Romantic Homicide that peaked at number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's ironic now that David rose to fame for the song Romantic Homicide, as he's now charged with homicide, first-degree murder to be exact. This charge stems from a dismembered body that was found in the front trunk of David's Tesla on September 8, 2025. For weeks, the Tesla had been abandoned, parked on the streets in the Hollywood Hills. Eventually, someone called it in and it was taken to a tow yard. There, workers started to notice a foul smell coming from the Tesla. Inside, LAPD officials would find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as 14-year-old.
Prosecutors alleged that was the day she was killed. The defense countered by arguing the victim presented herself as older. The prosecution's response was immediate, and legally precise statutory strict liability removes that defense entirely. Knowing a minor's actual age and continuing the relationship, they argued, extinguishes any claim of ignorance.
David Anthony Burke has taken the position that Celeste said she was 18. He didn't know she was a child, but he knew because he was told in February of 2024 that Celeste was only 13 years old. This is a strict liability crime, meaning that if he's 18 and she's 13 and they're having sexual relations, that is automatically a crime. He does not have a defense. However, he had direct knowledge of Celeste's age and continued in their sexual relationship. So I find
this was not a mistake, a fact case.
2. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can't immediately replace. Bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange, he calls that her runaway date, and I believe it was the day before Valentine's Day in 2024. He calls it the most important day of her life, aside from their anticipated wedding. Again, at this time, she is only 13 years old. This is just a couple weeks after, memorialized in these text messages, she apparently had an abortion.
The second pillar is the motive. The special circumstance of murder for financial gain elevates this from homicide to a death-eligible charge in California. The state presented a business manager who testified David earned between $10 and $11.5 million in gross revenue between 2023 and late 2025.
Let me give you the numbers this witness laid out. He says between 2023 and the end of 2025, David raked in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million. And he says that record label head made anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million off of just David. Now, why is this relevant? This goes back to that first-degree murder charge and the special circumstances around that charge. There are 3 of them. Those special circumstances mean this is eligible for the death penalty here in California, even though California technically halted executions back in 2019. So one of those 3 special circumstances include murder for financial gain. Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to...
Text messages read in open court showed Celeste threatening to expose the relationship to David's mother, his business associates, and his label. The prosecution's theory is not complicated. She could destroy a multi-million-dollar career, so she had to be silenced.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his penis. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste.
That brings us to the moral refrain you will hear 3 times, because it captures the prosecution's entire theory of the case. He chose himself. Not panic, not momentary rage, a calculated selection of self-preservation over a child's life. He chose himself. Then the digital pillar. According to the transcript, data pulled from David's iPhone and Tesla telemetry placed both devices traveling together from the Hollywood Hills up the coast to Santa Barbara County. The same route, the same timestamp. A passport card belonging to Celeste was later recovered near Lake Cachuma off State Route 154. The defense objected that the presence of the phone and car does not prove David was the person operating either. Reasonable minds can note the objection. Reasonable minds can also weigh the probability that someone else took his car, his phone, and his victim's identification on a synchronized 95-mile journey.
After David allegedly killed Celeste, prosecutors say he attempted to make a fake alibi, texting Celeste's phone asking, "Where are you at?" After that, David's phone and Tesla are both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County, the same place where Celeste's passport and personal items would later be recovered.
Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154, her rear.
Prosecutors allege David killed Celeste on April 23, 2025. They say David called her an Uber to pick her up from her family's home in Lake Elsinore, California, and then drive her about 80 miles south to his home in the Hollywood Hills, where he allegedly murdered.
Celeste arrives at the residence. Shortly after, David allegedly sends a text to her phone reading, "Where you at?" That alibi text, sent before any 911 call, before any report of an accident, before any emergency, becomes the clock. What transpired in that narrow window that led to a text message designed to feign ignorance? Was there even time to construct self-defense? Was there time to regret? Or does the speed itself reveal preparation?
The prosecution's going to do. Unless there's an eyewitness or surveillance footage, right, the defense is going to say, how can you know exactly what happened in that house, right? Maybe it was manslaughter, maybe it was self-defense. The problem is, if the prosecution can establish she arrived at this property at a certain time, and then 20 or so minutes later, David allegedly sends her a text, "Where are you?" The alibi text, right?
Yeah.
That would be a really fast time for someone to formulate that if this was purely a self-defense case. Oh my gosh, he fought for his life, killed Celeste in self-defense, and then so quickly comes up with the alibi text. Or let's say she does something to herself. She stabs herself, doesn't call emergency services, immediately sends an alibi text, "Where are you?" That's going to be the difficulty for the defense.
He chose himself. The fourth pillar is the physical evidence. Epic's criminalists testified that blood was found seeping through rubber floor mats in David's garage, pooling into the brick flooring beneath where the Tesla had been parked.
The court heard harrowing testimony about the recovery of her remains in the Tesla.
We haven't heard about this detail before. According to this testimony from one of those two LAPD criminalists, there was actually blood identified in the brick flooring underneath where a car would have been parked. And that was underneath black rubber mats that were laid down on the garage floor in David's house. So what they seem to be painting a picture of here is blood leaking out of David's Tesla, seeping through those rubber floor mats, and then seeping down into that brick flooring. Hearing that, and sitting right behind the victim's parents, it was jarring. There is so much evidence in this case that has been unsettling in truly shocking ways that I don't think I've experienced before anywhere. But being, in that courtroom with the victim's parents, I think that drives home the point that this is about a human, this is about a teenager, this is about a girl who was killed and dismembered. This is about justice for her. So this isn't just about how Celeste was killed, how her body was then mutilated. This is also about the cover-up efforts. I mean, somebody must have noticed, oh, it smells terrible. We got to do something to cover that up. So somebody actually opened up the front trunk, reportedly with her remains inside, and then put air fresheners in there to try and mask the smell. Multiple air fresheners. And all of that was, of course, documented and then taken into evidence.
The front trunk contained air fresheners, multiple, placed alongside human remains in what prosecutors described as a deliberate effort to mask the odor. A body is not an inconvenience you Febreze away. The defense pressed the medical examiner on whether the wounds could have been self-inflicted. The examiner could not definitively rule it out, given the advanced state of decomposition.
They found.
What's more, the defense posed an interesting question to the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho. Could Celeste have killed herself?
Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent has a mental health history? Is it helpful to know if they are suicidal? Is it helpful to know if they are habitual drug users? So to each of those questions, Dr. Ho answered, potentially. So then she asked him, did you have any conversations with the decedent's relatives to explore those characteristics? He did not. So then she proceeded to ask about the injuries, right? The documented injuries, these penetrating wounds, the disruption to one of her ribs, the damage noted on her liver. And the defense wants to know, can you definitively link those observations that were made during the autopsy to what you see on the overlaying skin? And do you know exactly how that occurred? Are you able to definitively report that somebody else caused those injuries? And I think the broad answer to all of this is the advanced state of decomposition precludes a lot of definitive information. The deputy ME simply cannot say how this happened or who.
But context is evidence too. A self-inflicted wound does not typically precede dismemberment, a Santa Barbara disposal trip, and an alibi text arriving at the victim's phone within minutes of her last confirmed sighting. The courtroom dynamics themselves entered the public record. Observers noted the defendant sat composed, expressionless, until the prosecution introduced the sexually explicit photographs. Then, according to those present, he began to fidget. His legs shook. He appeared to shrink in his seat, not when the autopsy images appeared, not when the dismemberment was described, when his own documented acts were displayed. Demeanor is not evidence, but it is data.
But before we move on to our interview with expert Jesse Weber, I have to talk about David's demeanor. A judge ruled he didn't have to be handcuffed, but he still needed to be shackled. And for the most part, he was pretty calm and emotionless in the courtroom, with a few notable exceptions, like this one.
When they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his dick pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down.
One final legal mechanism looms. The special circumstances filed, lying in wait, murder for financial gain, and killing a witness, make this a capital case in a state that has not executed anyone since 2006. The moratorium does not strip the charge of its weight, it turns it into leverage. The district attorney has publicly stated that no decision has been made on seeking the death penalty.
And out. So let me start by asking you, are you surprised by the ruling after the prelim that this is going to be heading to trial?
Not surprised, because the bar for this case to move forward, whether there's sufficient probable cause to support the charges, is quite low. It's quite low. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Having said that, and this is something I do want to get into, there was a question for me whether the prosecution presented enough evidence at this stage to support first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations. If you ask me, when it comes to the charge of continuous sexual abuse of a minor, when you talk about the alleged photos and text messages that were found on David's device or purportedly found on his device, that's enough. When you talk about mutilation of human remains, the alleged purchase history, the forensic material, the Tesla, the alleged Santa Barbara trips, seemed to be enough for me there. When it came to first-degree murder, and by the way, I interviewed Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman last night on my News Nation show. The defense raised some interesting questions about, you don't have the murder weapon. The chainsaws that were tested negative for blood. How do you know exactly what happened in the house? There was no surveillance footage. The Uber driver can't definitively say where he dropped Celeste off. There was no text messages before or communication before, or at least presented during the preliminary hearing, that David intended to kill Celeste, that Celeste seemingly invited herself over, and that she wasn't lured. There was a question of also, this idea that Celeste threatened David. Was there a self-defense argument? Did she do something to herself? I'm not saying any of that's going to work, but there was a question, did they present enough of first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations of lying in wait and killing for financial gain and killing a witness, that I thought they were good arguments by the defense.
And the defense has already signaled openness to exploring resolution. The machinery of plea negotiation is now fully engaged behind the sealed doors of this case.
You have to.
I interviewed Nathan Hochman. I asked him, what we saw, I mean, we didn't see it. We were just reading the reporting on it. But these graphic photos of Celeste's body being dismembered, the allegedly graphic, sexually explicit photos and messages, you really want to put a jury through this? You really want a jury to see all of this about a 14-year-old girl? Do you want the family to go through this? Is there an avenue? Is there a path by which you would accept a plea deal in this case? Could you use the death penalty as a way for a bargaining chip? Like, David, we'll take the death penalty off the table if you plead guilty, right? He said to me, if David wants to come forward with the plea deal, we'd be open to that conversation. So I think that is something that is strategically being kept back. But also with any prosecution, the death penalty complicates a case because it takes longer, right? It's going to take longer to gather that evidence, present that evidence, different mental health experts, different mitigating factors. And also you have to get a jury that would be death penalty qualified. Easier said than done. It's one thing to get a jury who can decide whether someone is guilty or not guilty, but for them to be recommending death, it's not so simple. So this is a consideration they have to have. They talk about it with the family. Do you want, we go with the death penalty, particularly when there's a moratorium on executions as of right now? It could elongate this case. It could take longer. Is that what you want? If we don't go that route, we can get to trial sooner.
The full preliminary hearing transcript is a public court document. You can request it from the Los Angeles County Superior Court under case number BA512974. We will link the request portal in the description. Read the testimony of the business manager. Read the cross-examination of the medical examiner. Then come back and tell us in the comments, was the alibi text the act of a panicked man? Or was it the final step of a sequence that began long before April 23, 2025?
A lot about this murder allegation, but I wanted to talk to you about the sexual assault allegation, because this to me seems really tricky for David to combat, because we've talked about this. The texts, the videos, if there is on record this alleged abortion situation, she obviously was only 13 or 14 when they were together. I mean, how does his defense deny that?
I don't have a great answer for that, because if this is true, what was presented at the preliminary hearing, and this is why text messages and photos and videos are such compelling evidence, because unless they say, it's not even that you can say, if there were just photos of Celeste, I'm sorry to do this, but if there were sexually explicit photos of Celeste on David's device and that was it, and he was nowhere in the photos, could they say, was it his phone? Was he using that phone? But they're basically saying they have proof that he engaged in sexual activity with her, that he's in the photos, that they're having conversations about sexual activity and about abortion. So it's going to be really difficult for him to get past that. Now, one of the things that came up is the defense seemed to suggest, what did she tell him about her age? What did he understand her age to be? The prosecution said, that's not a defense. That doesn't absolve you of liability. It doesn't matter what she said her age was. If you engaged in sexual activity with a minor over a period of time, that's it. I haven't seen any other legal argument to suggest they're wrong about that the prosecution's wrong about that, which makes me wonder, is that going to be a charge that the defense says, listen, he'll plead guilty to it. We can't fight that. Is there some sort of deal that can be worked out here? I don't know, but I believe that charge in and of itself carries up to 16 years in prison. So that's going to be a really, really difficult one for him to fight against, in my.
The evidence is waiting. We'll see you in the comments section. If you want to follow every filing, every motion, and every revelation as this moves toward trial, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Beyond the Gavel File, and turn on notifications. We don't follow the headlines. We follow the docket.